Jabulani, thank you so much for joining us this evening on Newsnight. Now, one would say that it almost appears as though South Africa is an island on its own, especially when you look at where things are standing when it comes to the African continent and how it's still criminalized, really, to be gay on the African continent. Would you say that that's the case in this case, that we live very sheltered here, away from the realities that actually continue to persist?
I guess, thank you for having me. And 25 years into our democracy, there's so much for us to celebrate in terms of our constitution and our rights. And of course, South Africa has so many legal privileges and protections, and I think that is a celebration in itself. But in stark contrast, I think, to the rest of the continent, we have amongst the highest violence towards LGBTI persons, despite other countries having criminalized laws. So in South Africa, we have a number of challenges around violence, and that seems to kind of supersede the fact that we have a number of legal privileges. And so the laws are there, but they don't necessarily protect us against violence, hate,
Why
and
does
murder.
society still propagate, perpetuate, promote, encourage violence against gays, lesbians, transgenders? Why do we still have an issue where corrective rape is still happening in our communities, where men believe that in order to correct a woman who is a lesbian, we need to violate her and rape her? And same goes for anybody who comes out and says they're gay. And same goes for anybody who identifies themselves as a male when they were female or as a female when they were male. Why do we have this problem in society? Is it ignorance?
It's not ignorance. I think just in the previous insert, we see the role that religious leaders are playing, that have a mass following of people, where misinformation is largely given. And religion in itself has played a role positively and negatively in a number of ways. So firstly, to talk about, what is the accountability around what people are learning about love, respect, dignity, compassion, all of these elements that are fundamental.
Yeah.
So we could say they are human rights, but deep within people's understanding is the human compassion, human understanding, right? Because to hate somebody because they're different from you must be rooted in something else that you were taught previously in your life, be it as a child, be it by your parents, be it by your church.
I'm sure
etc.
parents do not teach their children to rape, though, Jabulani. I'm sure you'd agree with me that I don't think a parent sits down with the child and says, when you see somebody that is gay or lesbian,
Sure.
the best way to ensure that they're no longer gay or lesbian is to rape them. I don't think that's what happens in a home of a child. So then what happens in our society when we're amongst colleagues or friends or even in acquaintances that makes it okay for society to act out and behave in such a violent manner?
I don't think, and I hope parents don't teach their children that, but I do think that in our homes, we shouldn't be teaching boys to be super masculine. And to be super masculine is to enjoy specific privileges that dominate women, that violate women. So whether you are gay, lesbian, transgender, intersex, or just a woman married to a man or a woman in society, nobody should be denied any particular protection based on who they are. And so there are particular lessons in our domestic lives that do impact on how the world sees men and women. So if a woman is violated on the street because she's masculine presenting, or if a male is violated on the street because he's feminine presenting, that underlying issue is based on that person's hate or distaste based on a lesson or an existence. So, and I think that's where I'm saying there's particular messages that come from our churches and from our homes that really inform prejudice and stigma.
Would you say that churches do play a significant role in some of the, I'm going to be very specific, in some of the hate that has been propagated when it comes to the LGBTI community, or some of the marginalization that has been propagated towards the LGBTI community?
I would say some churches and some religious leaders absolutely perpetuate hate and violence, and they use their platforms to dominate and misinform people. So I think there is a way that religious leaders are not being held accountable, and that's why they don't necessarily want to be regulated. Every empty building in Johannesburg is a church that is unregulated, that is manipulating people and raising money from ordinary people's lives. So I do think that there's an unaccountability regarding religious leaders and their messages to people. And we've seen that on a number of occasions, even across the continent. If there's a drought, it's the gays. If there's famine, it's the gays, right? If there's Ebola, it's the gays. And the same thing within South Africa, where gay people are blamed for a number of things that have nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And so the way society constructs who to blame is based on the most vulnerable, right? Women are blamed for a number of issues. So are LGBTI people. So often vulnerable people are blamed. In South Africa, xenophobia. Poverty is blamed on foreign nationals who run spaza shops in townships. You know, so the most vulnerable become targets. And this is really where we need greater protections and greater issues where the government needs to look at it. And legislation is just not going to be enough.
What about communities, transgender communities? Because that's a different ballgame altogether there. And I know that when it came to issues around gender identification, it was made popular, and I'm using the word popular, by Caitlyn Jenner, for example, when, you know, before it was Bruce Jenner and started to turn to Caitlyn Jenner. But underlying that, South Africa has been having this, right, for a number of years, and there are legalities that are protecting this. But how are we faring in terms of the gender identification? That's the transgender aspect of the LGBTI community.
Great. So transgender people often are assigned a particular sex or gender at birth and don't identify with that gender and may align their gender identity either medically or hormonally to the gender that they identify with. South Africa has legislation that allows for gender legal recognition where you can change your gender marker. It's not a very simple process or an easy process, and Home Affairs makes it immensely difficult. It is also set up as a very privileged access for people, so the healthcare system. I would say that the public healthcare system don't see it as a health necessity per se for transgender people who wish to transition. I would say for people who do wish to transition, whether it be medically or hormonally, of course there's a cost factor related to that. And also our medical health professional associations don't support.
So in other words, in layman's terms, it's not covered by medical aid.
Exactly.
Okay.
But they're happy to take transgender people's medical aid costs for anything else, whether it's dentistry or diabetes. But they don't see gender identity as an important issue in relation to transition care, which is a necessity according to the World Health Organization. So I would say that it is an area that needs far greater attention. Right now, for example, the pharmaceutical company Pfizer has not made any depot testosterone available to South Africa. So whether you're a cisgender man or trans man, hormonal care in South Africa has become increasingly difficult because you can't find the hormone on the market. So there are issues that restrict access to healthcare as such.
I want us to go back to the issues around policy, because this was very interesting. We always say that we need to decolonize and take ownership of ourselves as continents and be proudly African. Meanwhile, we were having a conversation. You were telling me about the carnal order of nature. The carnal order of nature is a policy that was enforced by colonial British rule in the SADC region or any other country that the British colony took over during the time of colonization. And funny enough, that order still stands in a lot of the countries. Botswana, for example, are some of the countries that continue to have the LGBTI community marginalized, so to say. And yet we come in and we preach about how we need to be African and Afrocentric. Meanwhile, we're still enforcing a British colonial rule when it comes to the LGBTI community.
Yeah, absolutely. In most countries that were colonized either by the British, the French, or the Portuguese, that is pretty much most of the continent, most of these penal codes are still in place, where governments use these penal codes to criminalize LGBTI persons, in particularly gay men, are criminalized through this law. So we talk about decriminalization. For example, last month, Angola just decriminalized homosexuality. Mozambique has decriminalized homosexuality. South Africa did, just after our democracy, has decriminalized. So there is a shift, of course, from that, and to not accept these colonial laws. They're not Africa-made. They're not indigenous to us. They're
Well,
foreign.
it's by the British colony, really.
Right.
Yeah. Jabulani, we have to leave our conversation there this evening, but thank you so much for joining us and shedding some light in terms of, look, we may be celebrating Pride, but what does it really mean when it comes to the realities confronted by the LGBTI community? And thanks a lot for joining us and shedding some light with that. Jabulani Pereira giving us the latest there. Now,